Okay, so I know it's been a minute and I haven't been posting, but we're gonna change that for 2025. But you know I could not leave you at the end of 2024 without telling you my top 10 favorite books of the year. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm JEN-nuh-nee and this is my channel, The Story Ain't Over, where I talk about books, give you vlogs, give you recommendations, give you book reviews. And if you're interested in diversifying your reading for 2025, then I highly recommend subscribing and joining along for the fun. What can I say about my last month and a half? It has been chaotic. I have been going through it. I'm figuring my life out and hoping that 2025 will be a better year. However, if there's one good thing that came out of 2024, it is the amazing books that I read this year. And I read a total of 58 books this year, and that's 5 more than I read last year, which is still well below my goal for the year. I had wanted to read 100 books. I say that every year. I never really actually hit it. And honestly, it's always just an ambitious goal for me with the ADHD and with working a full-time job and trying to do YouTube and trying to have a personal life and then having mental breakdowns every 5 seconds. So really, it's quite impressive that I've read 58 books. Now, whenever I do one of these videos at the end of the year, I always like to preface it by saying that the amount of books that you read does not equate to your value as a reader, does not equate to you being somehow better of a reader than other people. And for those of you who read maybe 5 books or maybe 1 book in a single year, that is still a lot. You are reading more than probably most of the population on this planet. So give yourself a pat on the back. You're doing great, honey, and we're gonna kill it in 2025. Anyways, what was I saying? I read 58 books. A lot of those were really fantastic. I feel like I really honed in on my taste this year, even more so than previous years. I did spend a bit of the middle of the year, you know, chasing different trends and trying to read popular books. I did not end up liking any of those books, and I will share those in a worst books of the year video at some point soon. And I have a bunch of other videos coming soon, but I knew I needed to share my top 10 books with you today. And these are the books that I have read within 2024. So they're not books that necessarily came out in 2024, but just ones that I read, that I loved, that I want you to know about, that I think are the best of the books that I read this year. Now, usually before I go into my top 10, I do go through my honorable mentions, but this time I just had so many honorable mentions that they kind of just felt like the continuation of the list, like the top 11 to 20 books for the year for me. So rather than just tell you about 1 or 2, I figured that this would be a nice perk for my Bindery members. If you are unfamiliar, Bindery is a platform kind of like Patreon where you can subscribe for a small amount and get some extra and exclusive content from me. Support me in my channel, please. I am going through it. And on top of that, you get to help me publish books with my publishing imprint, Boundless Press. I've done multiple videos describing what Bindery is, so I'll leave those linked down below. But TLDR, if you really want to support me in my channel, if you care for me, if you want to help me succeed, please do me the favor, join my Bindery community. You can either join as a free follower, or if you want to get access to the exclusive content, then become a paid member under one of the 2 tiers. And for the price of a latte, you can find out what my top 11th to 20th favorite books were of 2024. That video is already available on my Bindery community down below, so definitely go check it out. And now let's get into my top 10 books. All right, let's get into it. So these are kind of ranked by which ones are my favorite, and those ones are like number 1. But honestly, all 10 of these books are absolutely fantastic. I was so impressed with these books, and they just literally hit me in a deep and visceral way, and I'm so glad I read them. All right, so in number 10, we have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Mossvegh. I feel like I've talked about this book 1,000 bajillion times, especially on social, and this was definitely that book that I did not think I would like. I had never really considered picking it up because it seemed like one of those overhyped books that was going around book talk, but color me surprised when I picked this up and was absolutely engrossed, absolutely obsessed with the author's writing style and with the characters and just how unhinged the story was. Essentially, this book follows our main character, who is this sort of privileged white girl who lives in New York, and this is set in the early 2000s. She has lost her parents, she has lost people around her, she is going through it, and she is so depressed that she decides to sleep a whole year of her life away in the hopes that when she wakes up, she will be better. And she does this with the help of a really kooky psychiatrist who prescribes her all of the drugs under the sun, and she basically like takes them all and tries to to sleep her life away. Obviously, this book is 100% satire, but it does have so many relatable elements to it if you are someone who has suffered from depression or mental illness of any kind, because there's just something so gratifying to see that kind of representation on page, even if it's in a satirical lens. Because obviously you should not be making this your life, but it imitated so many aspects of my own life and a lot of my feelings when I'm in depressive episodes in my bipolar disorder. Although it's not really clear what her diagnosis is, there are elements of it potentially being like depression or bipolar disorder or something. So yeah, this was absolutely hilarious. I loved every moment of it. I know a lot of people hate this one because it is a satire, and so it can be a little confusing, and she is the most like Mary Sue, awful, jaded, and flawed main character you will ever meet, but I loved her for that exact reason. All right, in number 9, we have yet another mental illness girly book. This one really hit home for me because it had bipolar disorder representation, and it is by an author who also has bipolar disorder. And for those of you who don't know, I have bipolar disorder. I got diagnosed in 2023, and it really did change my life because I finally understood why I was feeling the things I was feeling. So it was very gratifying to see this representation on page and seeing a love story in the midst of that. So this is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. I absolutely love Olivia Blake's writing. I had previously only read actually the Atlas 6 by this author. It is a contemporary fantasy trilogy, and I haven't read the later books in the series, but regardless, I knew about this book for ages, and I had heard that it was only like a literary fiction, romance / love story, kind of more on the literary fiction side, but I didn't actually know that it had mental illness rep, and I was so upset that I didn't know that until like after I read it, because I felt just so seen by this book. In the book, we follow our two main characters, Reagan and Aldo, and they are both just very strange and eccentric characters. And our female lead, Reagan, does have bipolar disorder, and there's an element of these characters sort of meeting in a strange way and striking up this strange friendship and falling for each other in a really dramatic and tumultuous way. And I think part of that has to do with the very highs and lows of bipolar disorder. Reagan goes through multiple episodes in the course of the book, and she talks about her struggle with medication and with her moods and with people's perception of her. And I think that element was very, very familiar to me because I had spent so many years of my life having people tell me what they thought they knew about me and making judgments on me and my emotional states and what I was doing and the actions that I was taking. And it was very frustrating to not be able to put into words and explain why I was doing the things I was doing and why I was feeling the way I was feeling, because it all just ended up being like a failure of chemistry in my brain. And now that I'm on medication, my life has changed a lot. However, Alone with You in the Ether does have a bit of a narrative of the main character sort of giving up medication, which in the case of bipolar disorder can be very dangerous depending on how severe your bipolar disorder is. And there are a lot of people who go around unmedicated and are fine, and there's a lot of people who go around unmedicated who are not fine. But I am one of those people who is only fine because I'm on medication. However, in this book, Reagan does find a way to manage her bipolar disorder and her mental illness through other means. So this is all a long-winded way of saying this has fantastic bipolar representation, but I will say it is one kind of bipolar representation, and it was a kind that I really, really loved. I also am just obsessed with this book beyond the bipolar representation aspect because of the romance and sort of the love story and the beautiful, beautiful lines that are in this book. Olivia Blake's writing is just incredible, and I was just in love with so many lines, and I highlighted them, and I just want to like tattoo them on my soul, which is such a cliche, but here we are. All right, in place number 8, we have The Bandit Queens by Perini Shrove. And I have to say, guys, this was the most amazing cozy mystery I have ever read in my life. I truly never understood the concept of having a cozy mystery thriller because I feel like mystery thrillers are just so dark, and so how do you like make them cozy and fun? And I've read books like Finlay Donovan, which does this really, really well, but a lot of the crimes in that book and series are pretty light. Like the stakes aren't that high necessarily. Like, yes, she's put in life-threatening situations, but on a personal and emotional level, on a systemic level, she's fine. However, with The Bandit Queens, we are set in a tiny village in India, and we are following a group of women who quite literally don't have many rights, not enough education, do not have any sort of resources, are often treated badly by the men that they are married to or that are in their lives. And there's also an element of like caste going on and just the awful patriarchy. And amidst this all, this author somehow made this book feel light and funny and cozy and amazing, even though it was tackling such dark and harrowing and upsetting topics. And the author did this in a way that it doesn't diminish the gravity of all these awful things, but she also shows how these awful things are a very normal backdrop to the lives of these women and to actual people in the world. Anyways, the plot of this book is that we follow our main character Geeta, who's one of the women in this village, and her husband disappeared a few years ago, and people think that she murdered him. And so when another woman in the village asks Geeta to murder her husband for her so she can, get out of a horrible situation, Geeta obviously says no, because she's like, I didn't kill my husband, but this woman threatens her, and so Geeta is forced to go along with this whole plot. And it gets very messy from there, and the other women in the village get involved. And one of the things that I loved so much about this book was the female friendships and just the gumption and awesomeness of these women. It was a very feminist book, I feel like. On top of this, the book also has a mini little romance, which I thought was really cute. And overall, I could read 1,000 books of just these characters solving mysteries and doing all of the crazy funny things, because it was just so freaking entertaining. All right, book number 7 is one that I read in January, very early in the year, and immediately I knew it was going to be one of my favorite books of the year because it just hit me deeply in a way that I did not expect and that I really, really appreciated. However, this one was a pretty triggering read for me just because of all the things that the main character goes through and how it very much felt like a lot of things that I had gone through early in 2023 when I went through my breakup and when I was getting all of my diagnoses and I was just really struggling a lot, and it felt so reminiscent of that. I both felt seen but also totally eviscerated. But that book is Evil Eye by Ataf Rum. I've talked about this multiple times now and I just love it so much. This is one of her books that is on this list, and I will talk about the other one in a sec. Evil Eye essentially follows a Palestinian American main character. She teaches at a university, she teaches art, and when a unfortunate situation goes down at her workplace, she's forced to sort of reconsider her life, and she's already been very unhappy and dissatisfied with her life. And you can see that there is an element of her being in a very deep and dark depression and not realizing it, and it comes from this generational trauma that she and her mother have gone through, and just being a Palestinian as well. And there is also the element of her, dealing with the standards that are placed on women within her culture and society. This book, I feel like, just so accurately captures what it feels like to be in a depression so dark that it sort of consumes your life and consumes your sense of yourself. You start eroding your own desires and needs in place of others' expectations and needs and wants. And when you finally open your eyes, you find that your whole life is just unrecognizable, and that is frightening. So yeah, I feel like I really related to the main character Yara and everything that she goes through. And there are also parts in the book where she writes these letters to her mother and goes through some very traumatic memories, and I feel like that was just so heartbreaking, and I just loved every moment of this, even though I was sobbing every page. Although it is very sad, it is also a very empowering book, and I cannot recommend it enough. Okay, so Ataf Rum really killed it this year because her other book, A Woman Is No Man, also made it onto my top 10 list. This is at number 6 for me, and this was just such a phenomenally written book because it takes 3 different perspectives of 3 different generations of Palestinian women, and it particularly follows the main character Isra, who gets married to this Palestinian American guy and is taken from Palestine to the States and finds herself in this very insular world, being married to this man and being within his generational family, and all the expectations that are placed on her from her mother-in-law, and just the ways in which she is sort of told to put her wants and desires aside in place of her husband's and her children's and her mother-in-law's. This book was really fascinating to me because it just felt so reminiscent of things that I've seen in my own community. I'm Sri Lankan Tamil, and things that I had experienced and I've seen my mom experience and other women experience. And so it was both really, really heartbreaking, but it was also so empowering to see that story finally told from the perspective of a woman and with that sort of agency and tenderness as well. And beyond that, I think what was so fascinating about this book was the way that it so accurately captured the generational nuances of this whole situation and of a culture that upholds patriarchy through the women. And I think you see that strongest with the grandmother or the mother-in-law character Farida, who is very much like the awful character that you hate. But as you get to know her in her perspective, you start to realize all of the terrible things that she has gone through herself and all of the trauma that she holds onto and how that affects the way she treats the other generations. I would say if you're going to pick this one up, definitely look up the trigger warnings because there's some really heartbreaking stuff that happens. But I think every single moment of this book was necessary necessary and needed, and told this very harrowing story in such a careful and loving way. All right, on to the top 5. So in place number 5, we have my new favorite translated author, and that is Mieko Kawakami's Breasts and Eggs. I read her other book, All the Lovers in the Night, as well, and she has one other book, but this book really sold a show for me. Mieko Kawakami's writing is just absolutely phenomenal, and there's just something about the way that she writes characters and dialogue and just the musings of these characters and what they're thinking about that is just so interesting and fascinating to me. Mieko Kawakami is a Japanese author, and her works have been translated, and it's really funny because I have seen this book around bookstores and around town for years, and I never actually picked it up. And then I finally picked up her other book this year and then was like, I need to read this as well. And I was just so blown away because this is a very long book, but it packs such a punch. And I just found it so impressive the way that Mieko Kawakami sort of tackled these different topics of femininity, of womanhood, of sexuality, of parenthood, of motherhood, of what it means to be a single parent, of what it means to go through artificial means to have a child, all of these different things. The book is also very funny. It's got eccentric characters, and I just really loved the main character and just the journey that she goes through. She is very much that character that seems like she doesn't have a personality, and then as you get to know her, she's actually very strange, and I really like that. But yeah, I think above all, it's the ardent speeches that the characters give in the middle of the books about their thoughts on a specific topic that's very esoteric, and it's just so interesting to hear those thoughts. I can't really explain it. This is like the hardest book to explain and conceptualize if you have not read it yourself, so just do me a favor, go pick it up. Go read it. It's fantastic. All right, in place number 4, I have one of the most amazing literary fictions I have ever read in my life, and that is Against the Loveless World by Susan Abulhawa. I am so impressed with this author, with her writing, with her sense of humor, with her ability, very much like the author of The Bandit Queens, to portray very harrowing things, but also show it with a level of humor, dark humor, but also like a sense that you know these characters are so used to this crap and all these awful things, and so to them it is not so shocking as it is to someone who is coming to it from a very different angle. However, this does portray some very, very difficult things and so many triggers, so please go look them up before you pick this book up. This book essentially follows a main character who is being held in a Israeli solitary confinement cell, and she has been radicalized throughout her life, and she is essentially putting down the story of her life and what has happened to her and what brought her to this point, and we are getting that story. And so we flash back to when she's like very young, when she's a teenager, and we see her through all of these different phases of her life as she jumps between various Arab countries, and as she struggles with displacement and being a refugee, being abandoned, being exploited sexually, so many different things. And I think throughout it all, what was so impressive was the main character herself. She is such a resilient character. She goes through so much, and yet she still comes out of it still fighting. And I think that was just so inspiring and compelling. She's also just really funny. She has like great dark humor, and she's also just a very tender person on the inside and cares so fiercely about the other people in her life. This book also has one of the most heartbreaking romances I have ever read in my life, and it's like such a tiny part of the book, but my heart broke. And Susan Abulhawa is just such a fantastic author, writer. She has been a very strong activist and advocate for Palestinians throughout the past year or so, and she's been very vocal and has not minced her words, and I've appreciated that. But it's also been very frustrating to see, you know, outlets censor her and other Palestinian voices. And yeah, throughout this all, I just continuously trying to listen more to Palestinian voices and see what else I can do. But I will leave more resources and links and things below if you want to go check those out. And for those of you who have been showing your support throughout the year, I appreciate you immensely. All right, we are on to the top 3 books of the year for 2024. I'm so freaking hyped to talk about these books because I just was so impressed. So impressed. In place number 3, I have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I've had this on my shelf, I think since 2019, so it's been like almost 5 years. And I'm kicking myself for not having read this sooner because it is just such a phenomenal, phenomenal fantasy book. And it captures so many interesting topics and ideas and really does shed a light on our own contemporary world and the problems with it. This is probably one of the hardest to explain fantasy books I've ever read because it involves like multiple characters and different timelines, a very strange and dystopian-esque, but also fantasy-esque world. Like, it seems like it's in the future, but it seems like it's kind of like a past fantasy, and so it's kind of strange to understand. There are aliens, there are obelisks, there are all of the craziest things, but it has the most compelling characters I've ever read in a fantasy book. And it was just so stunning to see how character driven the story was. Like, we were following these characters and we care so much about what's going to happen to them. And although there's all of this like world building and other things going on, as you go through the book, it all starts to sort of click in, and then you're just like astounded and impressed and blown away. And I have to say, this book has the best, the best plot twist in a fantasy book I've ever seen. Like, the best. It was so phenomenally done. One of those really satisfying plot twists that like you lead up to, and then you're just like, damn, oh my God, that changes everything, mind blown, and you're just so invested. So yeah, 5th season, fabulous, amazing. I've read N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became and absolutely loved that as well. I know there are 2 more books in the series and I am itching to pick them up. I haven't picked them up yet, but I will very soon. And yeah, I just can't wait to see what I think of them and how this whole story ends, because this was just fascinating and I'm just so intrigued by this world, by the characters, and I want to know what's going to happen next. All right, in place number 2 and 1, we have 2 books that I feel like no one is talking about, and it's irritating me to no end. And I need more people to read these books and to know how amazing they are and to just generally revel in my love for them. Now, I will say one thing about these 2 books also is that in place number 1, I have a book that is just so freaking heartbreaking and so personal to me, and that's why it's in number 1. However, in terms of the book that I enjoyed the most, that tickled my heart, tickled my fancy the most, that would be the book in place number 2, because it was just so satisfying to read, so fun. I was really just savoring every moment of it. And I feel like I've been hearing so many mixed things about it, but like personally, I loved it to pieces because it had so many things I love in books in it. I need more people to read it. So in place number 2, we have An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. I have read Alexis Henderson's House of Hunger. I have A Year for Witching, but I couldn't really get into it, and I do want to pick it up at some point. But this is the author's dark academia fantasy book. And I have to say, I went into this with not very high expectations at all. I had gotten like an arc of it, and so I was like, ooh, okay, excited to read it, and I love dark academia. But when I finally started reading this and got deep into it, I was just so impressed with the storytelling, with the magic system, with the characters. And I think what I loved most about this book was our main character, Lennon. She is a young Black woman who is suffering from mental illness, and she has had really bad luck in her life. And when we open up on the book, she's engaged. She's supposed to be getting married soon. She's very young. She's sort of become like the trophy girlfriend of her partner. And we open up on her engagement party, and when she finds out that her boyfriend is sleeping with her best friend, she is seeing her life fall apart, and she gets a weird phone call in a parking lot and is invited to this school called Drayton College, where they teach you the art of persuasion. Persuasion is like this magic that allows you to impose your will on other people, on matter, on things. It is such an interesting way into the concept of magic, and I loved the way that it's like described and conceptualized. Like, I thought it was just so interesting, and it was such a new take on things that I had never seen before. But back to Lennon, what I was trying to say is that what I loved about Lennon so much was that she is someone who's down on her luck, and she just really desperately needs a second chance. And when she gets that second chance, the invitation to Drayton College, the chance to prove herself in a way, she takes it and she runs with it. I have felt that desperation before. I think if you are someone who has lived with mental illness, if you've seen your life fall apart, if you have struggled to get out of bed, if you have been time and time again told that you will amount to nothing because of previous experiences and previous struggles with mental health, then this is the book for you, because seeing Lennon try to make the most of this second chance was just the most gratifying experience ever. And I was just so inspired and just like so invested in her story. Like, I wanted her to succeed so badly. And I think for people who have not experienced like mental illness or, you know, mental health issues, I think maybe this won't be as relatable, and maybe that's why people have been rating this lower. But for me, this was just so incredible. It was both a really fascinating read, really interesting magic system and, you know, world building and great characters, really character driven, but it was also very mysterious and suspenseful and had all these dark academia things going on. And then by the end, it has like a really batshit crazy ending, and you're just like on the edge of your seat. You want to know what happens next. And I was just on the hook. Like, I was just so in love with this book. I was savoring every moment of it. And this is a chonker of a book. Like, it's massive. It's so long. And even by the time I got to the end, I was like, I still want more, because it was just that wonderful to me. I loved it. It's just dark and creepy and sad and chaotic, and is for the mental illness kiddos out there who are just trying their best. On top of this book also has a really interesting romance. One thing you should keep in mind though is that all the characters in this book are adults. Like, they're not school age, they're much older, like in their 20s. There's a romance with like a professor-esque character, and I have to say, guys, one of my favorite ships of the entire year. I was obsessed, and I just wanted these characters to be together. All right, folks, we are finally here. We are at number 1, my favorite book of 2024, the best book I read in 2024. And I have to say, this hands down goes to the incredible, amazing, stunning, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, harrowing, saddening, all around sigh-inducing Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. I mentioned just a second ago that this book was my favorite for the year because it is very personal to me. It's very sad, but it was also just so well done. This book actually won the, I think, Women's Prize for Fiction in the UK for this year, and I was so happy to hear that, because this is by a Sri Lankan Tamil author, and it is essentially a fictional account of the 1980s in Sri Lanka, as there were these anti-Tamil race riots, as the Civil War started, as the freedom movement started, Elam movement started in Sri Lanka. I mean, it had started earlier, but as it was gaining momentum. And it follows a young woman, a young girl named Sashi, who has 4 older brothers, I think, and maybe 1 younger one. And she comes from like a middle-class, slightly wealthier family, and she has always wanted to be a doctor. In the background, there's all this political stuff going on. We start to see all of these political events affect her life and her brothers. And we see her slowly get radicalized throughout this decade that the book covers. It opens in 2009 when the war ends, and then flashes back to her sort of recounting her experiences from the 80s. Yeah, this book was just so phenomenally done. Like, it's such an incredible historical fiction, literary fiction. It was so character driven, but it also did such a great job of recounting so many like historical events, and really shines light on the nuances of the entire conflict. So for context, I'm Sri Lankan Tamil. My parents were refugees from Sri Lanka. They came to Canada in 89/90. Their lives were very much caught up and changed by all of the events in the 80s. And it was so interesting because this book really covers the idea of these young boys who are radicalized throughout the 80s and who are recruited by the various liberation movements in Sri Lanka and organizations, the most powerful of them being the LTTE. And it was just so interesting to see like this very nuanced take on the whole situation. Like, it doesn't just talk about all the atrocities that the Sri Lankan government committed. It also talks about all of the atrocities committed on the side of the Elam movements. And yeah, I was like reading this book over several months because it was a very harrowing read. Like, I had to stop myself in between several chapters because it was just so heartbreaking. And I honestly found myself like crying for most chapters in this book because it was just so personal to me. My whole life and existence is shaped by what happened in this war. Like, I'm here in Canada because of this war. My parents had to leave their home because of this war. And there's like so many stories that my parents have told over the years that they just sort of like offhand say because they've lived through war, they've lived through all this trauma, and they don't know how to talk about these things. And so they don't talk about these things. And then when they do talk about these things, they're talking about it in a very like surface level, like matter of fact way. And you're talking about how your brother went missing and you never saw him again after the war. Like, that is heartbreaking. But that is what happened to one of my uncles who I've never met, my dad's younger brother. Before my dad refuged here, my uncle was part of the movement, and then when he tried to leave the movement because he did not agree with their violent ways and did not agree with some of their practices and the things that they were doing, they didn't like that, and so they retaliated and they detained him. And to this day, my dad doesn't know where his brother is or what happened to him. And that is insane and heartbreaking, and I cannot imagine like what my parents, what other people in the Tamil community and who have directly experienced many of these like events in this book have felt. But my empathy for my parents and just the whole situation was just so amplified. I just felt like so heartbroken reading this book. Like, I don't want to play down the fact that even if you aren't Sri Lankan Tamil, you will learn so much from this book. And so if you don't know too much about the Sri Lankan Civil War, the Tamil Genocide, the Elam movements, all of that. I highly recommend reading this book because you'll learn a lot. Like, even I learned a lot, even knowing the history, even knowing all of the stories. But I think what was so gratifying to me was getting more information from a sort of first person, like, fictional sense where, like, there's so much more empathy involved versus just reading like a fact sheet or a historical, summary. And then also being able to connect the stories that I've heard in passing over the many years of my life from my family, from community members, from extended family, and seeing how those things like overlap. Anyways, this is my long-winded way of saying I love this book so much. Like, it is probably one of my favorite books ever now. It has such a special place in my heart, and I'm so thankful to this author for doing the research that she did, for talking to the people that she did, and for approaching this story with such tenderness and also nuance. It's a very feminist book as well, I would say. And there are just so many different topics that are covered in the book. And beyond it, like, viscerally going through different historical events through the 80s, it also like covers different ideologies as well. And I think it was just such a well-rounded and well-done book. But again, like, I can't speak to it in terms of like accuracy from the perspective of someone who lived in Sri Lanka as a Tamil person at that time, because I did not. I was not alive. So take this with a grain of salt. But from reviews I've seen around, a lot of people really love this one, and I personally just found it so beautiful and heartbreaking and magnificent. Like, I don't understand how you can write about such sad and harrowing events and still write such a compelling, inspiring, beautiful book that I am so grateful that I've read. If there's one book that you're gonna pick up on this list of my top 10 books, please go pick up Brotherless Night, because there's like 2 books out there that cover the Sri Lankan Tamil experience from the Civil War and from the genocide, and I need more people to read this and understand what's going on. Okay, with that said, those are my top 10 books of 2024. This was a very long-winded, chatty video, but I just love these books so much, and I want all of you to pick them up, and I am so glad that I found these books. Like, I think this year was just one of the most impressive reading years I've had in a long time, and I just can't wait to read more amazing, diverse books by marginalized authors and by underrepresented authors. Like, I feel like I read from Tamil authors, I read from Palestinian authors, I read from just so many great voices, and I can't wait to do more of that in 2025. So if you enjoy this video, give it a like, comment, subscribe, do the whole 9, please and thank you. I appreciate you so much. I'm gonna be posting a lot more in 2025 because of some changing circumstances, so I'm really excited for that, and I hope you guys will be along for the journey. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you want to know what my second 10 top favorite books of 2024 were, then definitely go check out my binder community down below. It's linked there. Become a member for the price of a latte and get access to all of the previous exclusive and extra content that I've done, including like journal entries and videos on the publishing process with my imprint Boundless Press and so many other things. And also get access to this video and get all the book recs. I don't know if I'll have another video going up before the end of 2024, so if I don't see you again, thank you all so much for watching, for being here, for supporting me through 2024, and for, all of these years up until now. And if you're new here, thank you so much for joining, for watching, for coming along for the journey, and I hope to see you all in 2025. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!